Welcome everyone to episode 28 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts, and today I talked with Melbourne-based dance music producer London Topaz. Today we talked about how he focuses on retaining excitement during the songwriting process. Also, how he has a clear intention when going in the studio with other artists, and also how he lets intuition guide his whole process. If you could do us a favor and share this podcast on all of your socials, whether that's in a DM, on a story, or in just a normal day-to-day conversation with anyone, if you think they might be interested, let them know about this podcast. That's how we can share it with as many people as possible. And also, if you could do us a favor and hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to stay up to date with each new episode. Hope you like this episode. This is episode 28 with London Topaz. Let's go. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. Welcome everyone to another episode of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts. Today I'm here with London Topaz. London, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you for having me, Stu.
Good to see you. Nick, I know you as Nick. Everyone, London Topaz is your stage name, but I know you as Nick. We've known each other a little bit, but if anyone doesn't know who you are, give us a bit of a rundown about who you are and what you do in the music industry.
Yeah, so obviously London Topaz is my stage name, dance electronic music artist based in Melbourne. Been at it for about 4 or 5 years now. And yeah, got a bunch of new music that I'm releasing this year, so super pumped to have it all out into the world.
Absolutely. Now, we met obviously through being here at Marshall Street Studios. You rented a room here, and we've talked about your music and my music over the time, and it's really cool to see you finally get back on the old releasing train and getting some songs out there. And
finally,
yeah, I know we've been talking about it for a long time, so it's really cool to see. But we'll get to that. Let's take it all the way back to where music first started for you. Where did it come into your life?
So I played guitar when I was young. I suppose sort of that was probably the first memory of music and sort of what got me into it. But yeah, generally sort of like it was guitar, and then sort of discovered dance music. Always used to buy like the Ministry of Sound, like compilations, and just used to play them flat stick as a kid. So used to sort of like always just be interested in it. And then that sort of evolved into downloading music, and then, playing house parties. So dad bought me when I was like 12, 13, like some decks. And yeah, I think that was like my hobby for most of my teens. So just learned the art of DJing, discovered music, and then just started playing house parties for friends and local parties in the area.
Classic.
And then that sort of eventuated into messing around with production, and it was never like a serious thing at that age. Released terrible. I don't even know if SoundCloud was around back then, but used to release terrible remixes and edits of like old R&B tracks and whatnot. So I used to do a bunch of that, and only when I was sort of 25 or 24, like I sort of made the decision that I was gonna try and make it a thing. And here we are. Yeah.
So when you were DJing and stuff, was it just like being the party DJ? You didn't have any original music back then?
No, it wasn't original music. I mean, I probably trying to think back. There was probably some stuff out there, but it never was anything that I took serious. I think back then it was just trying to replicate what other artists were doing and then releasing it. There was no, originality or authentic touch to the music at that point. So it was a lot about just trial and error, ripping things off, and having no real sort of technical understanding of what I was doing.
It was just fun. Yeah, no, that's cool. But I remember the in high school and stuff when there was the DJ that used to like DJ all the parties and stuff. It did seem like, oh, fuck, they know what they're doing. You know what I mean?
I was
like,
that person, I think. It was like there was a couple of us, but I was generally getting booked for majority of the house parties. And like, I mean, I don't know, when you're like, you know, when you're a cool kid and, you know, you're DJing, it's it's mad. It's mad.
Yeah, it's so good.
I think like I was definitely on like a bit of an ego trip back when I was 16. I thought I was the coolest kid ever.
Yeah, you like got to stand behind the deck. Don't touch. Don't touch the gear.
And I was just redlining the whole time.
Why does it sound like shit? It's intentional. Don't worry about it. Yeah, sick. No, that's cool. So when you started like learning about production, how did you go about that? Like what introduced you to that as well?
Yeah, I think like, to be totally honest, like I think it was like over a 10-year period, like, and it probably started from when it was a hobby and when I didn't really know what I was doing. Like I think I would like pick it up and I'd put it back down and I would get frustrated with things. You know, looking back now, it was probably like the art of failure back then. Do you know what I mean? Like just not understanding what I was doing, and then coming back and giving it another shot. And that might have been, 3 months at a time or whatever it might have been. But, you know, it probably started back then. And then there was a period, I think, where, you know, like I sort of like grew up and like I hit sort of like that 22, 23 age where like, you know, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And I tried a bunch of different things. And I think I just set my intention on, you know, really focusing on production. And, you know, during that period, I think, you know, there was a lot of like big EDM sort of tunes coming out. And, you know, they were all like, you know, melodic focused. And there was sort of like a lot of emotion coming through that for me. So I think that sort of like really started to shape what I wanted to do and like I developed a clearer vision, I suppose, into sort of like what I wanted to get out of the music. So, you know, like having a couple of set things in stone that I wanted to achieve, like I just started to focus on that. So it was a lot about like building like, you know, like melancholy or like moody chords and then like seeing what I could do in that world. And then, you know, like maybe putting, you know, like, I mean, house music is like pretty basic in terms of like, you know, like four to the floor sort of kick. And, you know, even just like, you know, ripping a bunch of like percussion loops. So there was no real like method to the madness, I suppose, other than like trial and error and just seeing if I fell on something that felt authentic. Yeah.
So where did you like, who showed you like the production side of things? Like did you look up artists on YouTube and be like, well, how do they do it? Or what was all that about?
No, like I honestly didn't like learn anything from any tutorials or anything. I think it was like quite simply just like opening FL Studio at the time and just trying to figure it out for myself. Like I don't remember like sitting down with anyone or, you know, even looking at tutorials. Like everything was like self-taught. I think there was nothing really that
I think it's cool because it's like I've had a couple of the guests in the past say the exact same thing, and I think the authenticity comes through when you're learning by yourself. You know, and you know, the only way that I can reflect on that is when I was first starting back in, you know, 2010 or whatever it was with my mate Trav, there wasn't YouTube tutorials or anything. Like people weren't really doing that back then. So it was like you'd just open up the computer, hit record and see what happened. And you'd fail so much, but you wouldn't realize that you were failing. So it kind of didn't stop you from doing the wrong way.
Had you guys released music back then? Like, or was it,
and it was shit. It sounded like crap. But that's the thing is it never stopped you from doing that. You weren't like inhibited by going, I know I'm doing this the wrong way, so therefore I'm not going to put it out there. You kind of just did it anyway. Well,
I feel like also back then as well, like, you know, like we didn't have so much access to you know, like Instagram, TikTok and whatnot, where there was like, you know, every second video you saw, whether it was like, you know, for instance, like my TikTok feed now is like a lot of like, you know, production techniques, tutorials and whatnot. So it's like when you almost like, when you're getting like your algorithms are like are catered to this, it puts so much information in your head and it sort of like removes, I suppose, like the authenticity. Whereas like, you know, we speak of back then when you were working with your friend. It's like, you know, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And who gives a fuck if I am?
Also, yeah, exactly.
You know what
exactly.
I mean?
And yeah, like with the algorithm thing, it's like, yeah, you're fed all this stuff and it puts like this, like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it sort of way in your head. And you don't really like just go with the flow as much. You're thinking more and you're kind of going, all right, let's try and get this the right way, which takes a lot longer, which is it's good, obviously, to learn whether if it is the right information. It's good to learn from other people and learn from the masters and things like that. And it's definitely a good idea to invest in your, abilities by learning from those sorts of things. But even things like, Splice didn't exist back then. No. You couldn't get, you had to find guerrilla ways of trying to find these sound sources. Yes. Otherwise, you were producing it completely by yourself. With like shitty sounding synths and like, samples that you'd illegally downloaded and stuff.
Well, it's funny, and that's the thing, the accessibility to samples and whatnot. I'll jump on Splice now and I can literally if I need to find inspiration, I can hit what key I'm in. Yep. I can type if I want a loop, what synth, if I want drums or if I want atmosphere, and I can see the genre and I can go and find instant inspiration. Yep. Whereas back then it was you had to crate dig to find things. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's when you got it, it was geez, that was an effort.
Oh yeah. And it was when you found that sound, it was okay, this is what I need to really focus on. And you probably spent a lot more time on the one sample, the one sound, or trying to get the right synth patch or something like that. You probably focus on that a whole lot more than these days with all the presets that are available, all the Splice stuff, all the output arcade and all that sort of stuff. It's all there for you. So you don't really have to tweak as much. No. You can focus more, which in some ways for songwriting especially is a really good thing. It's if you can just go that straight away and just write it and get it out of the way, I think that's beneficial for a lot of people as well. But talk to us more about your process now. And, obviously you've been doing it for 10 years or so now. What the process looks like now and how it differs from, say, 5 years ago when you were releasing stuff at the start.
Yeah. So I suppose the process now for me, where I'm at right in this moment is I really focus on letting ideas be ideas. Mm-hmm. So I just I think over the last 6 months, I really looked at what type of producer and creative I am. And it's realistically, I don't love the technical side of things. Mm-hmm. I really love being the creative ideas guy. I love finding new ideas, creating moments when I'm writing. Do you know what I mean? So, for instance, for me now, I don't care how terrible things sound in that process of forming an idea. For me, it's about if I have the foundational elements of something that's special, then that means more than having something that sounds good in the initial stage. Because I can always go back and caress a sound or change a sound or sit off it for 2-3 days and come back and realize that it might not have been as good as idea as what I thought. And that might be that I don't have the correct sound, or it just might be a terrible idea, one of the two. But for me, getting the flow of ideas out is really, really, really important for me. Just because my music is so emotion based. So for me, it might be, setting a 16-bar loop and, creating a moment that I envision would be special within a set of mine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
or
cool.
Doing something like that. So for instance, I might try and be really chill about the process and just be in bed, watching, whether it's a live set from an artist that I really like, and seeing a moment in their set that really resonates with me, and then being what is it about this and that and the sound and the light show, whatever it is that is making me feel something, and then go and write 16 bars. And once I do the 16 bars, then I just close it. Once I get the idea out, I close it. And it's I'm not focusing on sounds, man. I'm just focusing on getting the feeling, getting the emotion, and I'll close it and I'll start again the next day.
Yeah. And so closing it, what's the purpose of that? Why don't you just keep going?
Well, I retain excitement for the next day because it tricks my mind, because I'm a bit of an overthinker. So if I continue going down the rabbit hole of trying to caress it and then create the full track, then I start to overthink that process. Yep. So I leave while the excitement's really high, while I've got the win, and then I come back the next day.
Yeah.
And then like it makes me more excited to come back the next day because like I'm pumped to get into the
Yeah,
studio.
it's
Do you know
sick.
what I mean?
I love it. It's such a cool process.
You try and catch the excitement because like, you know, I'm very sort of like I come in ebbs and flows with my inspiration. So like, you know, if I've had like a shitty day in the studio the day before, then my next day I might be like a little bit in my head about getting into the studio, which sort of like, you know, puts me in a bit of a lull. So, you know, if I get the win the night before or the day before, you know, depending on what time it is, close my laptop, wake up the next day, I'm like, fuck, I made this idea yesterday.
And it's also like it can work the opposite way as well, because if you're really in your head about something that day, a good sleep can just take you out of that. And you just wake up the next day refreshed and you come in and you're not actually beating yourself up like you were yesterday.
We'll go back 5 years ago to answer the second part of your question. Like I would, you know, almost to the point where it would be like torturous, to the point where I would like sit there and make sure that I like got to the end, but I wasn't really getting to the end. If anything, like I was just hurting myself in the process. And it just like in that state, like you really lose like all sense of like, you know, like the golden thread that's sort of like, you know, the creative purpose that you have.
It's also like the objectivity is like, you could think that you're on a really good path and spend hours and hours going down that path, and you're like, that sounds like shit. Like, after spending 6 hours on something that you thought was good, come in the next day, you're like, I don't know where I was going with that. So keeping it short and sharp is really
and I think that's a part of the creative process too. Like you know, there's days where I do spend 6 hours on something, you know, like spend 6 hours on an idea, and I go back the next day and I think like, shit, what was I thinking? Do you know what I mean? But like, I think it's like, it's the art of creativity, and you know, like sometimes you have to go down that rabbit hole to only realize the next day that it wasn't right.
And you know, you might be playing with for me, it's like playing with new plugins. That's where I kind of go down rabbit holes these days. It's like, what does this compressor do that the other one doesn't do? And then it's like you'll spend hours going, and you know, you're learning, you're kind of going subconsciously a lot of the time, like, oh, I can use this on this application, or I can use this. For you, it might be chords. It's like, oh, I've never used this chord before. Where would that fit in the context of a song, or you know, a drum loop or something like that? So when you're like, how do you know when you're on a good path? Then, like, I guess, you know, practice has a lot to do with it. But like, what sticks out to you when you go, this is it, let's go?
I think it's for me, like I just have to trust my intuition. Like when I get that gut feeling, I think, and it's what I've always had to trust. Like I've never learned an instrument. Like, you know, I probably learned guitar for maybe like 2 years. So I was never really good at it. Like I've lost all knowledge of it. Like if I picked up a guitar now, I wouldn't know how to play it. So I think like in the early piece, like I really had to trust like intuition and like, you know, that feeling or that moment where you have that moment where you're like, okay, shit, I'm onto something here. Like let's run with it. So for me, it's like just a lot about intuition. Or, you know, even if I'm referencing like another song, like if I sort of like hit the feeling or the emotion, then like knowing that I'm on that right path.
And what kind of, like, I know when you were here, you were doing a lot of mood boards and you were kind of crafting the space that you wanted to, even the layout of your room and how that looked and stuff. There was a lot of that to kind of get you in the right mindset. Do you still do that sort of thing?
Not as intense. I think like sometimes you can shoot yourself in the foot. I think, you know what I mean. Like
back yourself into a corner.
You know, it's like, you know, you have to light a particular incense before you know you start, or you know, like this and that. Whereas like now I'm just sort of like I put it like I have like one scent that is just always going in my room. And like I might make myself a coffee and like turn some music on in the background and like get into it. Do you know what I mean? So there's no like real particular layout as such, but I suppose like, you know, at least over the last 6 months, like I've become really like I've got a clear idea of like two things, whether like the visual aesthetic, you know, that I'm aiming for and the sonic identity that I'm aiming for. So like I really only focus on like nailing those two sets of the brief when I'm in the studio. Do you know what I mean? Cool. And there might be times where I sort of like, you know, like have a bit of a creative streak and push out into another like field or whatever it might be. But majority of the time having those like two sort of pillars of understanding of what I'm in the studio for, like allows me to stay on that path.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool. And you've always been such a collaborative person with your music as well. I want to talk about that. Like, you know, and again, how it's kind of differed these days compared to, you know, 5 years ago. Like, has the collaboration process changed, and how do you go about approaching people to work with? And I know that's a really big kind of field of, but let's kind of attack it. Let's maybe start with back in the day when you would work with people. How would you reach out to them?
Yeah. So like majority of the time it would just be like DMs on Instagram and whatnot. So just like sending a bunch of demos out to artists and seeing if they'd be interested to work on something with me. You know, majority of the time you get no replies, which is like frustrating in itself. But you'd sort of like, you know, you'd strike a couple. And like back 5 years ago, it would be a lot about, you know, like getting the artists, you know, to write in their own space and, you know, like, you know, get some like top line ideas going. Didn't have to be any lyrical content, just make sure the melodies are right, blah, blah, over the demo. And then obviously there'd be a process where, you know, they'd write lyrics and sort of we'd come in and we'd record and all that sort of stuff. And that took so long. Like it was, I think, you know, from when you'd probably connect with the artist to when the song was done, it would take like 4 or 5 months. And, you know, it's sort of like, I suppose it's not a long time as such, but I think like now the process has changed where it's a lot about connecting with artists and actually getting in the studio with them. Like, you know, getting in there and like the first session, you know, being, you know, the top line session where we're just getting like melodic ideas down and formulating those ideas, but also having a clear vision of like where I want to go with the songs. So for instance, like now, you know, I've been working with reimagined, who's a really, really good like vocalist, songwriter, and we've been like really collaborative in that process where, you know, my intention for the new batch of music was to make sure that, you know, the songs meant something to me. So, you know, learning about like, you know, songwriting in itself. Like I've never been a good songwriter. So like sitting there and being like, what do I want this song to be about? Like, and like make sure it means something to me. And I think, you know, like that process, you know, didn't take as long, but, you know, being in the studio and being able to sort of like, you know, like communicate when, you know, when you're not feeling something is much easier than, you know, an artist sending you something and then being like, hey, I don't like this. And then, you know, then it takes another 2 weeks for them to re-record and then you come back and then it's like, oh, maybe not this, you know? So sure. I think the collaborative process has changed in the sense that it's sort of like more, you know, in person now as opposed to like online.
Yeah. And there's a few things there. Your music obviously being as emotional as it is, you know, there needs to be a certain sort of energy to it, and you know what you want to look for. Yeah, and you know when it's not there immediately. Yeah. Right? Yeah, like, you know, when someone's not singing it the way that you want them to sing it or whatever, which is really important if they're the vocalist on your song. Yes. Right? You know, it's a collaborative thing, so it's both of your songs, but, you know, it's a London Topaz project. Yeah. Therefore, it's in your head the way that you want it to feel and sound and all that sort of stuff. So giving that feedback in the moment and feeding off someone's energy in the studio, I know because I've done a couple of vocals tracking sessions with you before, and I see when you click and you go, yeah, we're on the right path, and you're like dancing and like giving the good feedback to the singer and stuff like that. So without being there in person to give that immediate feedback, like you said, it just not only takes a long time, but how you communicate over like an email or a text is so different to, hey, you're doing it this way, I want to hear it sort of slightly. It's just like so much it's a completely black and white different process.
Well, you don't know how to take like an email sometimes. You know, like sometimes if you're, you know, for instance, if it's a younger artist and you know, you have some criticism to it, like it could like, you know, come across as you being like really rude. So then it just sort of like, you know, stumps them creatively and they just sort of like, they don't get it. You know what I mean?
And they just get in their own head because they're thinking of the wrong thing. It's like, I didn't mean that at all.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. Talk to us now about, you know, what a songwriting session or a production session might look like when you get in the studio these days? Like you're working out of their studios, right? Is it pretty much exclusively that way?
So like for a little bit there, like as I was writing new music, like I was there like two to 3 days a week at Joyluck Studio out in Thornbury. So Jack Aarons and Ramaran own that studio. So I was working predominantly out of there with both of them. Now just working from a spare bedroom at home, but I do jump in every now and then. But yeah, like I suppose, you know, like how it looks, it's sort of like, you know, for me now, like it's a lot about, you know, making sure that I'm working with the right people who really, really see my vision. So, you know, Jack and Claire have been really, really good at that. So, you know, if it's a production session, you know, just setting a clear intent on like what we're aiming for in that day. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's like, you know, identifying what the song needs. So like, you know, speaking about it prior and then having like a clear intention is into like what we're doing. So whether it's like, you know, quite literally like pulling apart a song because we made it like 12 months ago and then deciding that it needs like, you know, new bass synths, you know, new this, new that, you come back with it like with completely fresh ears. So just having a really clear understanding of what your intention is when you're going into the studio, you know, and it's the same with the songwriting session, like knowing what song you're working on, you know, knowing reference songs that, you know, that you would have like potentially written chords around, or what, you know, what you want to write about. Do you know what I mean? What sort of emotion you want in this record, and then being very clear and open with the person that you're working with has really, really helped sort of streamline that process for me. You know, especially over the last like 6 months.
And it's cool because, you know, I think based on what you've said, you like to work quickly. You know, you like to get things done. You have the intention. You go, we're going into the studio to retrack bass or rewrite some of the lyrics or something like that. You're not there to mess around. It's very intentional. You're getting it done, and that is also great for the other people that you're working with as well. You know, you're not wasting any time. As fun as it is to hang out in the studio and mess around with like keyboard patches and whatever. If you know the intention, you know the outcome of what you want that day, it's a lot quicker, and it just like feels like, yep, we got it done today. It feels really, and again, like you said right at the start of this podcast, is like you're going into the next session being like, yep, we did it last time, let's do it again. Yeah.
And it sets a positive environment, like a really like strong collaborative like environment, you know, like, you know, from the get-go as well, like when you have that clear intention as well, you know. But there's been many times where there's like a teething process with producers, and you may have seen it as well, where you know you sort of jump in initially, and you know the first session or the second session might not go as you planned, but you know you have an inkling or an understanding that there is something there between like you two, and you can make it work. But sometimes, you know, like if you go into a producer versus producer session, it's a bit of a battle of you know understanding each other's workflow and what works. You know, whereas I find songwriting sessions a little bit easier for me because like, you know, I'm not a confident songwriter. So like I let the songwriter take lead and I just let like, you know, let my intuition sort of like guide the session as such. And then, you know, I might be wrong on certain things, you know what I mean? And then, you know, I'm always open to like learning from the songwriter because, you know, it's not my strong suit.
Yeah. And I think that is also just building your relationship as well. You know, it's totally fine to not be on the same page a lot of the time in the first few sessions, because you are trying to understand each other, and it might happen even in like a producer songwriter session, or like you're getting a specific vocalist on your track or something like that. You have to understand how that person likes to work well, and as a producer, it is our kind of job somewhat to make them feel comfortable, especially if it's on your songs or something like that. You want to be able to make them feel comfortable and be able to work the way they want to work, but also you need to get stuff done the way that you want to. So there's a bit of give and take, but I think it's good to unpack that and work through those difficulties, because when you get past them and then you do finally click and you start to understand, okay, that person needs this. They need to, you know, have a shot of vodka before they start singing or something. I don't know. Could be whatever. Once you start to understand that, those next few sessions, you're actually going to get the really good stuff. Yeah, it's going to be tough the first few. You might feel like it's a waste of time or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I think too, like one thing that I've really sort of learned as well during like in this process is like, you know, to be really personable as well. Like, you know, like jumping in the studio and like I've had conversations for like an hour before we started recording. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's not about music. It's just like general talk, like just getting to know the person, making them feel comfortable. Like a lot of the time, like I've walked into studio sessions like super nervous, do you know what I mean? And then like, you know, you sort of get in front of the computer or the laptop and you're like, you're shaking, do you know what I mean? So it's like difficult. So like, I don't want to make someone feel like that. So for me, it's like, you know, jumping in the studio, like sitting down, having a conversation about things like what they like, what they enjoy, what they're up to, just general live conversation, which always like, you know, it's sort of like chills the energy. You get to know one another, and then recording is like super easy. Like I did a session the other day, and I think I recorded for half an hour and spoke for like 3 hours. But like the vocalist had like I think they're like nodules on it, so we're like chilling out sort of thing. But you know, like it was just nice, and like that's what the day was meant to be. And we got some sick vocal ideas, and they were just like 2 tracks, like one layer of vocal the whole way through, and it gave me enough to like, you know, to have like 2 songs to work on and walk away and be like, that was a great session, and I got to know someone like really well.
So good.
Yeah.
And like you said, that's what it was meant to be. And it's like it can be a difficult battle of being like, what are my expectations of this session, but also how do I kind of let it flow?
Yeah.
And like, how do I let it take the shape that it's supposed to take?
Yeah.
Without putting too much pressure on either of us.
Yes.
To reach maybe the outcome that we thought. So can be tough, but it's only with experience and the amount of practice that you put into it. You can't expect, you know, say if you're a vocalist or something, you can't expect that you've only done 6 recording sessions in your whole life to be able to understand those nuances of a certain day. You might not be feeling right. Your voice might not be working. Your brain might not be working the way you might have had a shit sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
You only know that with time and experience. So you got to really put in those hours.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And the years that it takes to actually build up that understanding of and the intuition like you were talking about before. Yeah. Let's get specific about like, you know, the things that you love to work on in a song or in a project or something like that. You know, what are your some of your favorite kind of areas of a song that you love to work on?
Yeah. So I suppose like I guess like once I get the idea down, like as we spoke of previously, like I think like my favorite area is obviously like sort of like working with like all those like sort of like upper half synth parts, you know what I mean? Like those like, you know, mid to high range frequencies. Cool. Can't stand bass sometimes because I can never find like a cool bass patch. I really love sort of like getting into those like those pad sounds and those like synth sounds because I feel like that's where a lot of like the emotion lies for me. I'm like I always talk about the emotion, but like it's just something that I always tend to like sort of push towards. So that could be, you know, whether I have like a set of chords and then experimenting with, you know, like a particular synth line or, you know, splitting, you know, those chords up into like different parts and like playing with like, you know, like a more like atmospheric sound and then like having something more in that like mid-range sort of that's like holding it together and just experimenting with like different sounds and how I can like get a certain emotion out of it and just like allow that to hold place for, you know, for bass and, you know, all those percussion elements and whatnot.
So do you find that like those sorts of areas of the song you tend to do early on?
Yeah,
so
I
that
think
everything else falls into place.
Yeah, I think so. Like I tend to like, I think like the first 2 things that I really focus on is obviously like, you know, the chords and then like obviously what's going to happen like underneath. And I don't have like, you know, real understanding of what's going to happen until I get that top part done, like those synth sort of stuff. So like I tend to always, you know, like get those synth elements like locked in first, which I don't know if it's the right way to do, to be totally honest, but I don't think there is a process. But yeah, I always, that's something that I intuitively always like, you know, push towards first. You know, whether it's, you know, like the chords or, you know, like creating like atmospheres on top and whatnot to be able to like lift the track up a little bit before I start doing things.
And how much referencing are you doing of other artists' tracks, or is it a lot of like, nah, I'm just going to kind of go with my gut, or is it like, hang on, how do they do that?
Yeah, I think like, especially now, like I'm definitely referencing a lot like a lot of music, I think, which is also good and bad because you can sort of get locked into like completely like taxing like a reference essentially. So it's kind of, once you get the idea out, like it's for me, like I have to like cancel the reference and then like move in my own lane at a particular point. But yeah, I think now because sort of like I feel stale in like that emotive part, where I feel like I'm doing the same thing, like I'm referencing like a lot of things in terms of like I'm trying to find like the small details in references where I can sort of like be like, oh, I didn't hear that last time. Do you know what I mean? Because like sometimes, previously when I'd be referencing, like I'd be looking for one particular part, whether it was like the mid frequency of how they held together something in that area. Whereas like now, like for instance, I'm looking at ways. I think when you make like melancholy music, like it's very easy to make things sound really like down and sad. Whereas like I'm trying to find that balance of how to like uplift things. So like finding a lot of artists that make that type of music but are able to like add a lot of like atmospheric elements. So like I'm doing a lot of messing around with like some granule synths, like sound toys like Crystallizer, just to get those like those really like top elements, soundscapey stuff happening. Naturally, and just learning all that sort of stuff.
And I think the style of music you create is, I mean, I've dabbled in it just experimentally. I've released a couple of sort of upbeat, dancey sort of stuff, but it's not my forte. But it's that balance of like, you might have a whole lot of different tracks in the song, but it doesn't sound like it. And it's like really tough to find that balance of like stacking things to create that ambience, but also like, does that really need to be there? I don't know, man. That's tough.
And the thing is, I think like majority of the time, like I find myself just like in the end, like when I get into a mix session, particularly, like I feel like, for instance, like in the production process, when you're adding those like things, it's like you're potentially trying to fill space, and then you get into a mix session and you start to like mix the record, and you're sort of like,
it doesn't need to be there. Yeah, man, that's crazy. That's cool. So I also want to know like about what you're actually using. We always talk about nerdy stuff here on the podcast, so let's dive into what software are you using? Let's start off with that and why.
So Ableton Live. I made the move probably like 4 years ago to Ableton. Like I was an FL Studio user, and that's sort of like, I think Ableton was sort of like the industry standard. Like a lot of my friends were using Ableton, and I was finding it hard to collaborate. So like I just made the move. Ableton is sort of like intuitive in terms of like getting ideas out. It's really, really good. Like it's predominantly made for like a live setting. So like being able to like flow ideas out, like it's really, really good in that sense. Love Ableton. Sort of like I know it like the back of my hand now.
I've seen you live once as well, which was really, really cool at the what was it, the Palais?
Palais,
that was fucking cool. That was so random. It was like right after lockdowns lifted, and it was just like a small you played on the stage. We sat on the stage. It was crazy. You played on the stage, of course, but we sat on the stage. That was fun. But does that also that has to factor into you being able to play a live set? Ableton's like made for that, for electronic music, like the ability to transfer that into a live capacity.
Well, like when I did the live show, like how I would work, it was when I was still working on FL. So I would export all all the multi tracks, like get them mixed, and then stack them together into like synth groups, percussion groups, bass groups, vocals, FX and whatnot, and then that would go into Ableton. Whereas like I think like back then I'd have someone like essentially set up the whole live show for me, but now obviously like knowing Ableton, like I can sort of set it up and understand how to get things to automate and all that sort of stuff. So it's much easier in that sense. So
mint. And do you use much hardware anymore? Is there like, I know you're using like drum pads and stuff like that for the live show, but for creation, just keyboards.
In studio, like I predominantly keep it relatively like in the box. Like I bought a Prophet during lockdown, just because it was like a thing to do, I suppose. Like learn a bit of hardware synth and like awesome synth, like loved it, but I just feel like if I get pulled out of the box, then I lose a lot of the inspiration. Like at this point where I'm at, like I would much rather like work with a soft synth where I can get a sound, sounding like, 80% of what a profit would, and then be able to like go back in and tinker it the next day without having to like get the patch up, re-record, record in automation and whatnot. Whereas like, now, for instance, like I know Serum like the back of my hand. So, and I have, I've got all my like presets organized into like, into categories, and I know where everything is. And, like I've got a particular like, preset folder where it's like strictly like London Topaz stuff. So going into that, like I know that I'm able to like, get a sound that I want, get it within, like 30 seconds,
100%,
tweak it a little bit, and then, have a rough idea of where I'm at. So like that initial process for me is all in the box. There might be some songs, for instance, sometimes like I'll go to like my Korg Minilog to record some like bass patches, because again, like I've got a couple of patches on there that I know sound good. Do you know what I mean? So like I'll jump in there and use the Minilog, but majority of the time, dude, like I'm all in the box. Serum, what else, like Diva, and that's really it.
Yeah. And so curating those patches, how long do you feel like it took you to get to the point where you're like, okay, now I've got my sound bank where this is the London Topaz sound sort of thing?
I think it's like there was no like real time period. I think it's just like always like understanding, like, I suppose understanding your sonic identity, and then like knowing when you're making a patch, or if you find a preset that is in that world and then you have to like tweak it, like knowing that, always having that in the back of your mind that that this could be a potential like source for whether it's this song or the next song. So like never deleting anything as well, like always saving patches and being like there's something in that could be cool, and it might not work for this song but it could work for the next song. So like there was I think probably like the last 2 years I've really had that mindset in terms of like understanding my sonic identity on like a real deep level, to be able to like know that when I get to a particular point it's like, okay, this is cool, let's save this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think like it just improves your workflow so much as well when you're focused on that side of things as well. For me, it's really important to do the exact same thing, especially for mixing and production as well, is like, always going back when I'm archiving my sessions, I will save all the presets that I've used in that session. And file organization is so crucial to know exactly where all my presets are saved. So these days, the way I like to do it is by organizing it into the type of thing that it is, whether it's a guitar patch or a vocal patch or something like that. And then by the project that I've worked on. So the artist name is the next folder. So the subfolder is the artist name that I've worked on. And then from there, the actual preset name is the song of that artist that I've worked on. So for me, it's really intuitive because it's like, okay, I know that I want to have a sound similar to that song that I worked on with that artist. I know exactly where to find it. It takes me 10 seconds to find that preset. Just drop and drag it into that that track that I'm working on.
Of course.
And so it's a similar thing, but in the time that it takes you to actually do that, it sounds like a lot. Oh, I've got to create the file. I've got to do this and that. It's really, once you're in the zone of doing that, it just makes the creation process so much quicker.
Oh, 100%.
And for templates and all that sort of stuff as well.
And templates too. Like that's been such like a game changer, in terms of like, and I'm constantly changing my template, because like, there could be like things that I improve on in terms of like workflow. I'm like, great, like that's, like I got that idea out like so much quicker than what I would have with the previous template. Let's save this template and continue. So like, for instance, like, setting things up like in a real strict working order, whether it's like, so for instance, like I have everything, like I have my kick drum separate to everything. Then I have like my percussion groups set up with like battery, where I can, like I can play in stuff. Then I have like drum racks set up just with like hats. I might have like noise hats, and then I've got like a set of claps, and I try and keep it like, 5 to 6 sounds in every like drum rack that I know are good. And then that's a part of like, allowing ideas to come out, knowing that like I've got everything I need in the session that I know sounds good initially. And I can always change it. But like those sounds are there just to get a vibe. And then like, the synth patches, the synth group as well is the same. Like I might have, a serum like Pad Patch that I know sounds good, that has worked with other songs. So I might have like something in that, like, you know, like lower mid-range frequency that, you know, like I know can, you know, hold things together, but I also might have something that's a little bit higher and a little bit more airy. And then a couple like, you know, like a sub patch, maybe like a Reese bass and more of like a plucky bass as well. So just when I'm just formulating those ideas, it's just really easy for me to go like, I know where this is and I know how to get it.
And I love it. And I think what I used to think when I was first starting was like doing that tends to, you know, I always had this idea that I'll just always be creating the same song, but you're just not. You're more actually creating a certain sound.
Yes.
Which can translate, and you'll notice if you listen to albums of certain artists, they tend to have similar sounds across the whole body of work. That it kind of gives that album that sound or something like that project that sound, and that's really cool because it kind of puts you in a place in time.
Yes.
I kind of go, that's what I was using in 2023. Maybe I'll bring that back for one song and give it like that vintage vibe.
I think
vintage London Topaz.
I think it's essential though. Like I think like majority of the albums that you listen to, like, and you vouch for this, it's like, you know, like that album like encapsulates like a moment or like, you know, particular sound or like an energy or something that like there's something always like there's a thread in that album that holds it together. Do you know what I mean? And like we as listeners might not know it unless you know the artist, you know what I mean? But like that artist, it might be, you know, like whether it's working in a particular studio or having the same template set up or like being really interested, you know, in using one particular synth, do you know what I mean? Or, you know, using a particular plugin on something that made it sound like, you know, really weird or whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? So there's always a thread that holds something together. And that's what makes, I think, like, you know, artists feel original to me, you know, like the artists that I listen to at least.
And it also like just makes it more interesting. Yeah. Like it's really cool to unpack. And I know a lot of people that kind of, you kind of hear in like, I don't know, whatever it is like the common speak about certain artists that change their sound from album to album, and people can tend to get butthurt about that. They're like, oh, I wish they sounded like they did 10 years ago. And it's like, nah, that's actually what makes it super interesting. Some of my favorite artists have changed that many times, and that's what keeps it fresh and exciting. On the other hand, there's some artists that are super reliable when you know you're going to listen to them, you're going to get that sound. But for me, it's a lot more important that people keep trying new things and keeping things interesting and trying a new, whatever it might be.
Well, it is. It's like the evolution of growth. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know, I mean, you know, you're never going to stay in the same point for the rest of your life. Do you know what I mean? And especially as a creative, like you have to like find new sources of inspiration and things that inspire you, you know, like, you know, I don't know, like, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers, do you know what I mean? Like, you know, they, you know, their well-known album, do you know what I mean? Which I wouldn't even know what it is, but it's like, you know, what is it?
They got heaps, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, some of the music that I listen to, like, it's like, you know, that was like the Red Hot Chili Peppers I knew, but what they released like last year was completely different. Do you know what I mean? So it's like no one's going to stay the same for 20 years.
100%. I love it. Well, one thing I like to do as we start to wrap it up, and it can be a potentially difficult question, but I like to ask for your like one really solid bit of advice, and it's cool because you straddle both the producer and the artist side, so it's cool that you can cover both of those. But the one piece of advice that you have for producers and engineers as well, and then on the other hand, artists.
Okay, so a bit of advice for producers and engineers. I think it's sort of like, for me, like let things be organic as a producer and an engineer. Like, you know, as I said earlier in the when we were talking, like let ideas be ideas. You know, let your creativity flow through and find inspirations in whatever way you feel inspired. And then don't worry about what things sound like initially. Like just let an idea inspire you, you know, whether it's in, you know, in a chord, you know, in a bass, you know, whether it's like, you know, a particular melody, you know, in whatever way you find inspiration, like let that come organically. And, you know, and let that inspire you for like tomorrow's session. And I suppose like, you know, that in itself has been like a really, really like, like inspiring process for me because like, you know, I have like 10 ideas, like, you know, sitting in like in a folder now, and I'm really excited to like go into all of them. Do you know what I mean? Just to hear how they sound and like develop them, you know, and 5 of them may be great, you know, but.
And the one thing that I can reflect on for knowing you for a little while is there was that period where you were kind of finding it hard to overcome that mental block of like not allowing just to find inspiration and going with the flow and stuff. You were in your head a lot and you were kind of stopping yourself from doing stuff. And I've told you this a bunch of times in the last few months. It's like really cool to see you releasing music again, because it seems as though from the outset, because I haven't been talking to you as much, is that you have been just kind of going with the flow a lot more and just kind of like letting things happen the way they're meant to happen and just like committing and getting to that release point of just putting it out there.
It's just like not controlling the process. And that's the thing. It's like, you know, you just have to be like, just remain open, like, and have fun with it. Like, I think, you know, the moment that you start overthinking and coming down on yourself, you know, like a ton of bricks is when you suck the fun out of it and it becomes really, really hard. So that's probably like my biggest advice for producers and engineers is that like, you know, have fun with your ideas and just continue to like be inspired in whatever way that means for you.
Yep. And then for artists?
For artists, I think it's having like a really clear vision, you know, having a clear vision of your identity, who you want to be, you know, a clear sonic understanding of, you know, the type of sound you want, a clear understanding of, you know, who you are, the visual aesthetic that you want to portray, whether that's on like social media or when you play, you know, having those two pillars set in stone, is really a game changer for artists to be able to like understand where they're going. So yeah, and that's really, really helped me.
Yeah, I love it. And, you know, we obviously talked about that at the start of the podcast, is like all those things that you said is it's so true, and it allows you to kind of get in the mindset of I am that person for this project, and I am on this day, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to feel like this. I'm going to, and don't be yourself if you're not, but it just allows you to get into that mindset a lot easier and just kind of find your place a little bit easier and not challenging yourself, not questioning yourself a lot.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, like the whole questioning yourself. I think when you question who you are, it's like you might need to just like pull back and like try and sort of refine the vision a little bit more. And it doesn't happen overnight. Like it's taken me years and years and years, and it might change again in a couple of years, or it might change tomorrow. Do you know what I mean?
It
definitely will. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, you know, for me now, like that's the advice that I'd give. And, you know, if I come on again, I'll probably say something different.
No, I love it, man. That's sick. Well, thank you for joining me. This has been sick. I'm stoked to connect with you again. But I'll have all the links in the show notes, but just verbally, where can people find you?
So Instagram, London Topaz, TikTok is London Topaz, and Facebook is London Topaz.
Yeah, and Spotify and Apple Music.
London Topaz.
Keeping it simple. Love it. It's so good, man. Well, yeah, thanks again, man. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
And thanks to everyone for checking this podcast out. Really appreciate it. What really helps us, if you can share the podcast on your stories, DMs, in an actual conversation with a human. That just gets the word out about this podcast and spreads it to as many people as possible. We want to educate. We want to help people learn. And that's the best way that you can do that. And also by hitting follow or subscribe on all of the podcast platforms so that you can stay up to date with each new episode. But that's about it from us for today. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to What's That Sound? Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.